Good evening, everybody. It is Mark Dolfini. It is the Landlord Coach Daily Show. I hope you're having an awesome day and had an awesome weekend. So tonight, what we're going to talk about is we got a letter from a listener, and also a why I feel like I've been beaten with a boat oar. All this to come on the Landlord Coach Daily Show. Let's go ahead and get started. Hey everybody, it is Mark Dolfini. It is the Landlord Coach Daily Show. I hope you're having a great day, a great evening, or whenever it is you're watching this, if you're watching this on replay. So thanks so much for all of your support and everything that has been, all the questions that you guys have asked me over the days and weeks and stuff like that I've been doing this. So I actually had a neat thing that someone reached out to me and sent me an email, and I have honestly no idea who they are, but we'll get to that here in just a second. So I alluded earlier to the fact that I had felt like I had been beaten with a boat oar. Well, I can't wait until tomorrow morning when all of my muscles are completely stiff and sore, because this was my day today. I was up on a roof tearing off, I think it was about 10 squares worth of shingles. And it's funny because I often get asked when I'm coaching my students, one of the questions that I will ask them, and many times they'll ask me what my day-to-day activities look like. And I love to teach. I love to coach. It's one of those things that I just know that time just gets away from me when I'm doing that. And I just feel like, I can go for, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. It doesn't feel like work to me when I'm doing it. So that's when I know that I'm just in my zone and I can feel like I'm doing it, and I just really, really enjoy it. And I had a coaching session with a new student today, and it was, we were a little over 90 minutes, and I could start to see through his camera lens that his eyes were starting to get that glazed over look, and he was starting to tap out. So I had to let him up. But he was really, really engaged, and I love that. I love when a coaching student's like that. But for me, then I went, and it was such a beautiful day here. It was such a pretty day here. It's September, and here in Indiana, we've got some really just amazing weather. It's been cool, no humidity. It's like I wasn't sure whether to check a calendar or a map, but it sure as hell didn't feel like Indiana. But I was up on this roof, and tomorrow I'm going to feel like I've been beaten with a bat, because there's probably parts of my body that are sore, that aren't sore yet, but will be sore tomorrow. So that was my day today. But so anyway, that's one of the reasons why I will likely be hurting tomorrow. So if you see me in person and I smell like I've been bathing in Bengay, you'll understand why. All right, so I'm going to go to my question, the question that came in, and it was kind of a confused question. So they signed the letter. This one, let me pull this up here. It was Sleepless in Cincinnati. All right, cool. Good play on an old 80s movie. So it is, let's see, Dear Coach, I'm just going to hit the meat and potatoes of it. My wife and I have been watching your show and was wondering if you had any advice for us. So this is obviously from one of my 12 listeners, and if you net out all my family and friends, that's probably about 7. Okay. So we currently own and manage our own rentals, but we don't know if self-managing is the best fit for us. I'm not sure how many rentals you've got, so you didn't say that. What advice would you give us if we were going to look for a property manager to manage our rentals? This is a great question. This is a question I get actually fairly often, not only among my students, but also if I'm teaching, anything online, or if I'm in front of a room educating or teaching anybody that's maybe wanting to get into the space, and they think, well, I'm just going to turn it over to a property manager and my life will be great. Well, so many of you know I have a property management business as well, which manages a lot of my units and other people's as well. So I feel like I can answer this both as an investor and as a property manager. So here's the thing that I often notice. when people are bringing, my wife is saying, you better not smell like that. So in other words, I better not smell like Bengay okay. Well, I don't know, sweetheart. I don't know what to tell you, but I know that I'm going to hurt bad. Anyway, so when people come to a property management company, when they try to either leaving a property management company or they're looking for another one because they're not satisfied where they're at, almost always I ask them what the problems are, because quite frankly they may not have a realistic expectation in terms of what a property manager will do. They're not going to manage the property like it's their own. They just simply will not. I mean, if they had a property, two given properties, they're going to manage their property a little bit differently than they're going to manage yours. Partly because they have to, right? They have a fiduciary responsibility to you that they may have to report on things that they normally wouldn't be expected to be reporting on if it was their own property. Just as an example, you need to be notified of non-events, right? So this is where I refer to as having a negative feedback loop. Now follow me here for just a second. So a positive feedback loop in my world is like if something happens, you're notified, right? So let's say, a fire, God forbid, happens at your rental property. You are subsequently notified once the property manager finds out, right? A negative feedback loop would be, how do you know when something doesn't happen? So, is the property manager, do they have a robust infrastructure and process to notify you when something doesn't happen? For example, what if you don't get paid your rent? Okay. What if what if the resident doesn't renew their lease? Okay. So in these particular instances, you're notified of a non-event. You're notified when something doesn't happen, right? So that takes a robust infrastructure and process, right? Remember, in the VIP method that I talk about in my book, The Time Wealthy Investor 2.0, shameless plug, which you can pick up on Amazon. But in that method, the VIP method, right, the infrastructure and process, that's the system. That's the system part of really any business. You've got to have infrastructure, you've got to have process. So almost always whenever I hear of people wanting to leave a property manager or finding a property manager, or they're struggling, almost always they complain about one thing, and almost one thing universally, and that's poor communication. They're not communicating when things happen or when things don't happen. So, like, for example, the first indication that they would get when something happens, say there's a maintenance request that comes in, because the inevitable maintenance request will come along. How are they notified? Are you notified via email? Or do they just, the first notification that you get is when you get your month-end statement and there's $300 missing out of your rent proceeds because you were expecting $700 and there's only $400, right? That should not be the first time that you're notified that there was a maintenance issue. You should be, of course, notified when you get either a work order in the mail or some sort of a text or something. But whatever their system is, you should be notified. So, to get back to your question there, Sleepless in Cincinnati, there's a lot of things to ask. Of course, the common questions are, well, what are your rates? What do you charge for? Those are the sorts of things. I don't need to go through all that stuff because I'm sure you've figured out, you can compare, what pricing is. But what I would caution you on is make sure you're comparing apples to apples, because the property management companies are going to run very differently based on what they're good at. Some property managers are great at managing single-family dwellings. Some are more catered towards commercial properties. Some are catered more towards student properties or mixed-use properties, right, where you've got residential and commercial that's mixed. So you've got different types of property managers that do different functions. But you've also, and why that's important is, if you've got a property manager that's really good at managing properties on a commercial basis, they're not going to have the same infrastructure back end if they run into maintenance issues in the middle of the night, right? Many commercial property managers, they clock out at 5 or 6 and they don't hear from their customers until the next morning. I mean, it's just not something that they have to worry about. It's just different, right? That's what I hear from many commercial property managers. Not always the case, but sometimes. But generally, in the residential realm, that is definitely different. Like, there's an expectation that you have, after hours maintenance and things like that. So, how would you test that? Very simple. look at their infrastructure and process. How would you test their infrastructure and process? If you were to call this property manager that you're thinking about, call them after hours. See what their infrastructure is like. If their phone sounds like it's being answered at a cell phone, I would really worry about that. What if that cell phone gets lost or dropped in a bucket of water or, stolen, right? Sometimes they just discharge and shut off. So, or let's say for argument's sake, you call a property manager and it says, thank you for calling. If you're having an emergency, please hang up and call this number. Well, again, you're looking at a single point of failure where this property manager, it's like, okay, well, that number sounds like it probably is a cell phone number. And again, what if that cell phone number isn't being answered? There's been times where I've left my phone in the car and I didn't even realize it until the next morning. Well, thankfully nothing happened. This is back when I was managing all my properties by myself. But you got to think about that. So now, let me give this to you in another aspect that you might be thinking about, and we'll wrap up this segment. But we've all eaten at a restaurant, right? We've all experienced bad service. We know what that looks like, right? Now think about this. Think about this in the context of infrastructure and process. Okay, so the when you're looking at it from the perspective of infrastructure and process, again, when you have bad infrastructure or bad process, it always shows up with bad communication. It always, that's the symptom of the disease. So here you are, you're sitting down, you got seated by the hostess, and you're sitting and you're waiting, and you see over there that the waiter has 7 tables, and this waitress over here has 2. Okay? Now, either that's a bad infrastructure or bad process, either meaning the infrastructure wasn't set up to make sure that that waiter isn't overloaded, and that waitress over there is not, sitting there with 2 tables. Right? That could be bad infrastructure or bad process, one of the two. Either the scheduling software didn't work right, or it didn't allocate it right, or the person that's divvying it out with the process, something's wonky there, right? Something's not working, right? Because you can see it sitting back. Whatever it is, now we see the problem. Now the problem is we can't communicate our order, we can't communicate our food order to the kitchen. Bad communication, remember? So because of bad infrastructure or bad process, it doesn't really matter which, we can't communicate our order to the kitchen. All right, is that making sense? So what I would say is you want to test that in the best way that you can test it. Send an email. How long does it take to get an email back? Right? Ask them specific questions that are going to test their infrastructure and test their process. Now, you can't test everything. Unfortunately, there's just going to be things that you're just not going to know. But you can get a sense of the basics that if you send a question out, how long is it going to take to get back? Or, do you have to send one email to accounting and one email to maintenance and one email to the general manager, to find out who's going to answer this question? Because, admittedly, if you have a question about a maintenance item, I could argue that it's both, it could be an accounting question or it could be a maintenance question, right? It's hard to know. It's hard to know until the question comes in. So do they have one dedicated email that's dedicated to you as an owner? And they get to figure out who's the best person to answer that email, right? That sounds like it's a good infrastructure and good process. Here's the problem, though. When you have a good infrastructure and good process, it's almost invisible. It's like you don't even notice it. The only time you notice it is when it's broken or non-existent. The only time you notice when there's a problem with infrastructure or process is either when it's broken or non-existent, and that's the problem. So it's easy to become an expert about the problem, right? But when it's running well, it's almost invisible and hard to notice. So look at it through the lens of what I wrote about in the book, through the vision infrastructure process method. Look at it through that lens and test those things related to infrastructure and process as much as you can. Thanks so much for your questions, Slate Plus. I really appreciate that, and I hope that helped out. Okay, so we are going to move on to the last segment here, which is, of course, the most ridiculous thing on the internet.
So ridiculous.
That's right. It is so ridiculous. Now, this is just, come on. It's like they can't wait to find something to just grab a story and run with it. And this is such a non-story. I don't even know why it showed up. But as the world knows, President Trump came down with COVID-19 last week. He was diagnosed with COVID-19 last week. And several members of his inner circle, including his White House press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, has also tested positive for COVID-19. However, that's not what this news anchor reported. Go ahead and roll the footage.
Has tested positive. Another member of Donald Trump's inner circle testing positive for cocaine.
That's right. You heard that right. He said the member tested positive for cocaine. Why? He quickly recanted and said, no, I'm sorry, not cocaine. He did say COVID-19. But it was why is that even showing up as a story? The guy made a mistake. And that was the headline that said, White House press secretary tests positive for cocaine. Of course, if no one else is going to read further, they're going to just say, oh, well, she likes her nose candy. It's a non-story. Why are you even reporting on this? So, obviously, number one candidate for and winner of the most ridiculous item today. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for your questions, and for my 3 or 4 listeners who are out there. You are an ardent few. I really appreciate the support, guys. Have a great rest of your day, and please remember, if you don't place a value on your free time, someone else will. But most important, there is no amount of money that will make time irrelevant. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see you next time. Take good care.